Those of you who were here last year remember Jeanne Liedtka being the star of the show, and I couldn't resist but to ask her back, putting her towards the end of the conference this time towards the beginning. She's got a new book out, which I'm sure she'll talk about design for growth, or growth by design. And it is a good way, I think, to wrap things up in terms of value creation and the relationship to design. Please welcome Jeanne Liedtka.
Great. Well, as always, it's a privilege to be here. I'm not quite so sure it's as big a privilege to be in this spot here, but I'm looking forward to talking. I'm following the directions I received from Patrick, which is to talk about organic growth and design, which is mostly what I seem to talk about anyway. But in particular, I think I'd like to take a moment and play the role of the business school strategy professor, which I don't very often do. But I think at an event like this, among this gathering of those of us who have drunk the design Kool-Aid, you know, that's what's so wonderful about coming to this event. And we know the great promise it shows. There's always in the back of our mind this little nagging thought of, what if all those naysayers are right and we really are just a fad? We're just a flavor of the month, and we too shall pass and be relegated to the bottom drawer with all of the T-shirts and coffee mugs that represent all of the other business fads that have come and gone, right? But I don't think that's going to happen to design thinking. In fact, I would stake a great deal that it's not. Now, I do think that what we can expect to happen is that we will undoubtedly see design thinking bastardized and oversimplified and poorly executed, and all of the kinds of things that business organizations do to absolutely any new initiative worth its salt. But what we will not see is it going away. And let me just talk for a minute about why that is and what I think it means in terms of the opportunity that we in this room have to go forward. First of all, it's been a constant theme in our 2 days together of how the business world has changed. And this is just one way to look at it. There was this golden halcyon time for U.S. business in particular when markets were growing, when we had big firms enjoying incredible advantages just because of scale and the way they were able to inhibit access to distribution to their competitors. There were new tools and technologies that drove bottom line growth in the form of profitability and productivity. High stock valuations fueled a lot of acquisition activity, and we know, in fact, that many organizations have literally built their entire growth strategy on acquisition activity. And then finally, consumers seem to believe in the ever-increasing availability of just about everything, right? And then, to quote the other Buffett in business, we blew out our flip-flop and stepped on a pop-top. And the world we live in now makes finding growth a huge challenge. It's because we've seen the slowdown in the developed world, growth shifting to the emerging world, where we see that our easy, expensive solutions don't work very well and don't generate growth. The scale edge has disappeared, certainly in the developed economies, as we've lost manufacturing in favor of service, which doesn't have the same scale properties. And the internet has pretty much demolished barriers to entry and let a lot of small, hungry, and far less overheaded, burdened competitors into the market. All of these efficiency and productivity tools, we have to wonder whether we haven't already been leaned and meaned and qualitied and everything else out of a lot of space for improvement. The allure has finally come off, the acquisitions rose. Probably after probably 40 years of academic research, which with complete uniformity suggests that acquisitions more often destroy value than create value. Wall Street has finally gotten skeptical about acquisitions, and we see that often now the announcement of an acquisition drives an organization's stock price down, not up. And then finally, that consumer confidence, that notion of everything everywhere, we've started to really raise issues around resource availability, the limits of consumerism, climate change, system shock. Consumers are worried and not buying the way they used to. So now, all of a sudden, organizations have to work hard to find growth. And what I've concluded after about 8 years of studying managers who've been successful at finding growth opportunities in their own organizations is that organizations are almost invariably their own worst enemy when it comes to finding growth. I'd like to conduct a little non-scientific study of that. So let me see the hands of everyone in this room who works for a large organization. Okay, lots of hands. Now, I want to see the hands of everyone in this room who works in a large organization who would say that this first set of descriptors best describes their organizations relative to the second one. Okay, hands of people on the first. All right, and I want you to move outside the little oasis of creativity in the user experience area, if that's right. But by and large, does your organization fit this side or that side? Okay, so let me see the hands again on this side. Okay, pretty much every hand that I saw. Okay, there was one or two, right? I can do this without any concern about being humiliated by seeing a sea of hands that describe the large organization they work for as creative, tool-based, understanding of customers' emotional needs, good at exploring, focused on creating value, innovation-oriented, and preferring errors of commission over omission, right? And the reason we know that is because most large organizations are unquestionably built to succeed in a world that no longer exists, right? They're optimized for conditions of predictability and stability in a world where the shocks just seem to increase. They're designed for top-down control in a world that's increasingly chaotic and where local knowledge as well as global knowledge matters more than ever. Their tool set is oriented almost entirely towards efficiency in a world where we know pursuing opportunity is now where we need to spend our time. They're hardwired to avoid risk, and they are addicted to the idea of proof, right? In a world when yesterday's numbers are not very good predictors of anything, right? And where, as we know, proving something today that we want to happen in the future is basically a losing endeavor. They're obsessed with big ideas and impatience for results, and we all know how hard it is, and any venture capitalist can tell us, to predict what idea will be big at the outset. They're hyper-analytical, when we all know that if you want to really reduce risk in a world of uncertainty, you have to put analysis aside and prefer experimentation. And then finally, they monitor and reward successes that are easily measured. And the other thing we know is that almost all the important stuff for the future defies easy quantification in today. So we also know, everybody in this room at least, that design has the ability to save this world, not just make it pretty. Right? And I won't beleaguer you with all of the reasons why design can save this world. I think all we have to do is read through the list of everything that's wrong with organizations today to see the tremendous benefits that a design thinking approach brings. The question before us is, how do we do that? Right? How do those of us in the design world who know what it has to offer figure out how to really execute on this wonderful opportunity that we know has to be there? Well, we've talked a lot about systems and process in the time we've been here over the 2 days, and I heard a lot of inspiring stories from people who are doing a lot in their organizations to try and make the culture of the organization more user-friendly for people who want to do design thinking. And it embarrasses me and saddens me, I think, after 30 years in the business world and studying business organizations, to say that although I admire those people tremendously for the work they're doing, I think it's an uphill battle. Right? I think there is no easy solution to how we reconcile the tension in a large organization between managing in a way that takes care of today and managing in a way that allows us to invent a different tomorrow. Right? As long as we live in a world where Wall Street expects you to meet quarterly earnings projections within a cent, as long as we live in a litigious world where when consumers spill hot coffee on themselves while driving a car and drinking your product, you're in trouble, when we live in a world where malfunctioning of a piece of equipment or operator error on the part of somebody in your organization can bring the entire organization to its knees, we're living in a world where rules are here to stay. Right? And no matter how much we'd like to see organizations reinvent themselves to be places where innovation and creativity and autonomy flourish, And no matter how much I think we respect and admire the work of people who are moving that direction, I think we have to conclude that we have to find alternative paths as well, because the reality, I think, is that for the foreseeable future, the managers that I know will have to themselves mediate constant tension between doing what they need to do today and trying to think more creatively about tomorrow. So the question becomes, if we accept that, some of us at least, rather pessimistic view of the ability of large organizations to change, what does that mean for how we exploit the power of design? Well, there's an alternative path that I'd like us to consider and talk a little bit about, and that is this notion of how do we democratize design in organizations? Okay. Or in other words, what are the other 284,969 people at Telefonica doing while Pamela's 31 are designing? Right? And what might we get out of thinking about those people? So when I say democratizing design, I'm sure that there's already a few kind of shivers running up and down the spine of people at what that might mean. So let me say what it means to me is distributing literacy with the design thinking tools and approaches and ways of addressing a problem throughout an organization. What it doesn't mean is telling managers that they can be expert designers. Right? And why is this an important path? Well, I've already told you why I think changing organizational culture, systems, and process is incredibly hard work and unlikely to dramatically alter the experience of most people trying to do new things in organizations. The other thing I'd point out is that we may have to change organizations, but people already bring their whole brain to work. So the question is, are there ways in which we can invite them to use more of it and different parts of something that's already there? The other thing I'd say is that asking forgiveness is a lot more energizing for most of us than asking permission. So I often find when I say to a group of managers, well, we've got an hour together. We can spend that hour figuring out how to grow your business, or we can spend an hour moaning about corporate systems, process, and culture and why they don't change. How would you like to spend your time? Right? I find that they're energized by the idea of moving at something that's within their sphere of control. And let's face it, there's a huge amount of opportunity that every manager and every organization can find without permission from anyone if they know even some basic tools and approaches out of the design world. Okay. And then finally, systems and process is only one lens to think about where design lives. One of the things that has always been interesting to me is the tremendous discussion and dissension over this notion of design thinking and what we call it. I've often thought we should just make up an acronym because all important business initiatives have an acronym anyway. So we have TQM and VOC and EVA, and we could just call design thinking DT, right? And after a while, everyone would forget what it stood for, but it would become popular, and we would know what it meant, right? But detox, there we go. That might be the best way to do it. But you know, the other reason I think it has not bothered me, this notion of design thinking, is because even though we all know that design involves many things other than thinking, choosing to behave in a designerly way always involves making an explicit, thoughtful choice. Right? So one way to think of design thinking is that it represents making a particular kind of choice. Right? And it's nothing more than that. It's a choice to be human-centered and to invest energy in deeply understanding the needs of people you want to serve. It's a choice to be skeptical about imposing our own view of truth on top of other people. It's a choice to see failure as learning and to keep trying, and whenever possible, to show instead of tell. And then finally, it's a choice to listen to feedback and be willing to call your own baby ugly. So if we think of design as just a choice, then the question becomes, how do we help managers choose design? And if even just an individual manager elects to choose design for the things within his or her sphere of control, in many ways, I think we've succeeded. So this is how we don't help managers choose design. And of course, this is the famous scribble produced by, I think, was it Tim Brennan, of Apple's creative services when asked what was the secret to Apple's innovation process, right? And I think if you look at that scribble, you will see exactly the obstacle to allowing managers to feel that they can do design. In fact, although I certainly understand the obsession with Apple that we all have, I mean, everyone does want their own version of the iPad, and suddenly and miraculously to become overnight the world's most valued company, right? What we know is looking to Apple to teach managers in most large organizations how to do innovation is, to me, like looking to Moses for advice on how to cross a river. Right? We're going to get told, you part the waters, right? But the reality of it is, most managers already know they don't have what it takes to part waters, right? So they just give up. When in fact, what they need is someone to tell them, well, yes, some people can part waters, and those people are very special and very talented, and you should nurture them and value them and take care of them. But the rest of us actually can learn a technology to build a bridge. And to build a bridge, we don't have to be a creative genius. So we've done a lot of work, my colleagues and I, on dealing with fear as the obstacle to keeping managers from embracing and trying and experimenting with design thinking. Now, that seems strange to say. We've got a group of managers in a company. They're adults. What are they afraid of? Right? Well, we know most organizations are built around the fundamental principle of never looking stupid. Right? That is the decision rule in most cases. That's why managers in almost every organization prefer to commit errors of omission instead of errors of commission. It is almost always better not to act rather than to act and risk being wrong. And of course, design is nothing other than a seemingly endless set of opportunities to be wrong, right? It's the path to be right, we know. So how do we deal with this fear that managers have? Well, Tim Ogilvy and I have worked hard to develop what is an approach that has absolutely nothing whatsoever new in it, right? And in fact, we could look at any set of design theories on how design happens and replace the words on this with words that could be inserted from others. But the point here is we're trying to somehow simplify in a way that, of course, underestimates the tremendous power and value that design done in a sophisticated way can have, but makes it accessible to managers. And so our approach has been to ask 4 simple questions. What is that asks us to reflect on the current situation and encourages us to do some deep and ethnographic type of research to really understand unarticulated needs. What if, which allows us to dream and create some ideas. And then what wows and what works, which are essentially different forms of testing processes. We've got a pretty simple set of tools that go with that. Tools from customer journey mapping right through assumption testing and learning launches. Right? Tools that managers can learn. And then finally, we discovered that really wasn't enough. It was still a little bit too fuzzy. So we've created a series of what we call project management aids, starting with the design brief that we would all recognize. But in fact, creating kind of a project management process that goes along with design that allows someone to kind of track from beginning with the design brief to creating design criteria, to move into brainstorming and concept development, creating a napkin pitch that we then move into testing, and then finally creating a learning launch guide that kind of prescribes how we behave in the pilot stage. So again, no science, nothing even really new to people who know design, but we've had tremendous success with managers using this model, in part because what we find is that people are desperate, and never underestimate desperation as motivation for action, right? And 2, because they're liberated, right? Because we've been telling managers for so long to only bring part of their brain to work. And when you invite them to bring the rest of it and demonstrate the way that bringing the rest of it actually helps them to do something that the organization's asking them to do, grow their business, but in a way maybe getting in their way, it's just incredibly empowering. So what we're hoping for here, the opportunity, is inviting people to bring their whole brains to work, not to leave the business brain, we've spent a lot of time training them about behind, but to bring the other part of their brain too, so at any moment, as they mediate this tension between these conflicting objectives they're given, they can make intelligent choices. And if the situation is right, and if the situation calls for it, they can choose design rather than the traditional methods they've been taught. So as we think about doing this, in the middle of me thinking about all this was, of course, this Fast Company post from about 2 weeks ago. I suspect that the folks at here at the school saw it. It was about the Rotman Design Challenge. I don't know, how many people saw that post and have been caught up in part of this conversation? Okay, quite a few people suspected so. At any rate, Rotman has a design competition in which they invite MBA students and design students to Rotman to talk about, to do a project. It's an innovation project that a local bank teed up in this case. And they invite teams of MBAs into this competition, and eventually a winner is selected in terms of the quality of their work. Well, one of the judges of the Rotman competition wrote an article that appeared as a blog post on Fast Company several weeks ago that attracted a lot of attention from the MBAs, because, of course, if you actually want someone to pay attention to you, insulting them in a public vehicle like Fast Company is a great way to get their attention. And although I don't think the author really intended that, this is just one of the quotes. Business school students were slaughtered by the design school students. Would you go toe-to-toe with even a purple belt in jiu-jitsu having never taken a lesson? And although I think it was probably not the author's intention, the message that got carried away from that was that teaching design, even at a modest level, to MBAs was probably a lost cause. Right? Well, predictably, this brought out the Jersey Shore in a lot of people. And the hoarders, who I think of as the people who want to keep design for themselves, with good reason. I'm not claiming that there isn't a pattern of abuse inflicted on designers by managers, so it's completely understandable. But call me an elitist, but I think it can be good that lots of MBAs don't get design. The results can be more dangerous than if they are afraid of design because they know they don't understand it. Right? It's an enlightened view. This is one of my favorites. MBAs, your time is over. It's easier to teach business skills to a designer than teaching business people the meaning of empathy. That's a great one, right? Obviously, it's not as easy to teach design students empathy as we think. Right? Right? And then the third one, and my personal favorite. Corporations, as everyone knows, are ruled by a race of alien reptiles that use MBAs as their slaves. Okay, all right. So the good news on this was that some of the other responses, there was an outpouring of responses from MBAs in the comments on the article, and they were wonderful. And I'm just going to share a few of them with you, because at some level, my hope is that this is the next generation of business leaders talking to us, and this is what they're looking for. Okay. I wholeheartedly disagree with positioning design and business as two distinct adversarial forces at battle for problem-solving and decision-making rights. This polarization may be good for link-baiting sensationalist headlines, but it is nowhere near reflective of how business design works in the real world, where complex challenges require the skills of both business and design. They're wonderful. I had to stop it. I think I've got 4 and had to stop. What you need is equal and respectful collaborators for mutually generated equity rather than competitors for value. When we're competitors, the MBA's understanding of money wins the value contest, but MFA's understanding wins the innovation. I won't apologize for my fervent desire to learn about design thinking and to try and integrate both business and design into this sweet spot where wicked problems can be solved. I know I need to learn, and I am learning, and I will continue to learn. And then finally, designers and business people often mix like oil and water. Conventional thinking is that designers are egocentric aesthetes, and business people are penny-pinching prigs. Smart practitioners of both disciplines understand that amazing things are accomplished when talented people come together to explore the combined potential of their unique gifts. Collaboration is the catalyst for real innovation. And so I take great comfort in those words. I take comfort in one more positive sign, and that this article, which is still online, which was entitled "Need to Solve a Tough Business Problem, Don't Hire an MBA," has mysteriously morphed into being titled "What Both MBAs and MFAs Get Wrong About Solving Business Problems." Okay? Suggesting that even Fast Company thinks they've gone too far. Right? So, where are we then? The argument I've been trying to make is that to achieve organic growth, businesses need design. And they need design to improve people's lives and create ever better products, services, and markets that work and create value in both the developed and the developing world. We've argued, and I believe, that without design, business simply deteriorates into an increasingly vicious battle for an increasingly smaller pie. I also believe that without managers around who choose design thinking themselves, design will remain just an outpost surrounded by hostile territory. And then finally, I believe that anything we do, any action we take that can expose managers to design thinking and what it has to offer is moving us towards goodness. Right? And I'd like to end with a question and leave lots of time for discussion. And that is, what if those 284,691 Telefonica people who don't work for Pamela bring just 1% more of their whole brain to work because of design thinking? What wicked problems might they tame in the process? All right.
We do have lots of time for questions, and I'm sure there will be some. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Great talk. You know, one of the things that struck me when I saw the comments, and this is something that has disturbed me for a while, is the conflation of design and MFA. Because MFA is a Master of Fine Arts, which sort of moves design over to the art world. I think it's something very, very different. And I think one of our challenges in design is that the public perception is often around designer as artist, and the kind of stereotypes are all about that. So I think one of the things we need to figure out how to do is how to move it away from an MFA kind of discussion. Certainly the things that are taught here are not of that ilk, but we have kind of a challenge with that.
Yeah. And I guess we can blame that on Dan Pink, probably. The MFA is the new MBA, I think, is what said it. Otherwise, no one even knew what MFA stood for before that. Exactly. Right. No questions.
I'd like your perspective on getting backing from managers and other people by participating in design thinking processes and that kind of thing to get buy-in from the company and moving forward in that direction.
I think what I've learned trying to teach design to MBAs or design thinking at a modest level to MBAs is that if you get trapped in the debating the usefulness and value of design thinking, you just never get out of the sandbox you're in. Right? That for managers at least, so much of the basic principles of design thinking are so foreign to everything we teach them. Right? We teach managers to be so analytical. We teach them to prove things before they do it. We teach them to be very efficient and only come up with one best solution. Right? Hardwired in are a whole set of values which design thinking challenges at such a fundamental level that the ability to kind of conceive of what we're actually talking about is such a challenge that until they actually get to do some of it, they really can't figure out what it is we're asking of them. Right? And so we find even small exercises, as modest as the wallet exercise from Stanford from the design school, that you can do in an hour and a half, that alone brings clarity about what we're talking about and starts to demystify this process, right? And I find managers get excited almost immediately. And at the end of that hour and a half, they're ready to learn more and do more and try more. Right? And so I think part of it is just figuring out low-risk, unthreatening ways to get them into practicing and playing with some of the design tools. And then the value becomes very obvious very quickly.
So I have a question. If you look at Geoffrey Moore and Crossing the Chasm and Value Proposition, is that design thinking or is that an MBA philosophy?
I think if you look at a lot of the popular books today, they are all highly complementary of parts of the design philosophy. I mean, for instance, Lean Startup is very compatible with design. Small Bets is really what design is all about. I think Crossing the Chasm has a lot of elements of design thinking. I think in part what is the beautiful distinctiveness of design thinking, at least from an organizational growth perspective, is that it really offers a turnkey solution beginning to end, right? So we can start with an area of opportunity and we can end with a pilot in the marketplace. And design thinking will guide us through every one of those stages. I think some of the other stages, like Lean Startup, they help us with Small Bets. But Small Bets is a hypothesis testing device, right? If you haven't generated great hypotheses, then you don't have much that's really exciting to test, right? But if you look to design thinking, we've got all of the work around how to identify opportunity, which in many ways is always the part that we have utterly failed at in business. I mean, we know we can test the bejesus out of anything that you give us. Coming up with the idea in the first place, that's what design thinking really offers.
Given that you're at Darden, how has design thinking done anything to change the philosophy of MBA schools in terms of building in the flexibility to change the paradigms that have created the place that we're in the business community, right? Mm-hmm. The problem for organic growth that you laid out in the beginning is sort of their own making, because they're limited by the way they're defining the problem and how much of what they're now teaching in business school is creativity or flexibility to change the problem. In other words, new measures, new ways of looking at how you value value.
Well, I think one of the beautiful things in academia is we can talk about large organizations and bureaucracy, but in academia we manage to be simultaneously small and bureaucratic at the same time and loath to change, right? So if there is a world in which small bets make sense, it is in our world. And certainly design thinking at Darden is something that has started out as a small bet. It's in a series of elective courses. It's an increasingly popular set of electives, but right now we really haven't entered the fray of the required first year. Harvard, as probably many of you know, has done that. Harvard now is introducing some of the design thinking tools in its required first year curriculum. Not in much depth, but clearly the language and some of the tools are being factored into this new field project. And I have to say, as I told them when I visited there a few weeks ago, they have my tremendous respect, but personally, teaching design thinking to 900 MBAs, 850 of whom don't want to be there, doesn't sound like a prescription for success. It seems to me that if we know anything from design, it's about optionality and it's about choice, right? And so certainly my philosophy at Darden has been to make design thinking a choice that students who are interested could explore. And as those students get interested and excited, then more students will join. Now, I will tell you, in an MBA program, the problem we have is if the students get excited, they want jobs that look like that at the end of their MBA, right? And that, I mean, I think you've probably solved it much better here at the Institute of Design, but most of the people who show up at the Darden School are not looking to us as a source of people who can be involved in innovation and do great things. And so the risk is you get these frustrated students who fall in love with something. I mean, I'll regularly have students who will say, I've been here for 2 years, and this is the first class where I feel like I'm at home. I feel like this is about me and what I'm meant to do. And then I have to break the bad news to them that, IDEO had 500 internships last summer for one slot in San Francisco. And as I recall, they didn't hire anybody because no one was a good fit. right? So that's not exactly kind of a way to get MBAs in large numbers excited about anything, right? So I think we need to figure out how business people who really want to do design, what are the paths that they can take, right? Because as we've said, we know they're not designers. We're turning out people who love innovation and who feel like they bring two toolkits, but how you find the place to use those toolkits in large organizations is something that we're trying to crack now. Now, we have used design thinking approaches with the faculty to do some curriculum revision at Darden, and it has been extremely successful. We moved, there was a Business Week article a couple of months ago, we moved a greater number of places in the Business Week student satisfaction ratings than any other MBA program has ever moved in the 2-year period between measurements. Right? And I attribute that not so much to the way we changed things in terms of curriculum when we did our student journey mapping and tried to develop a deep and empathic understanding of the emotional as well as the intellectual journey our students were on. But what happened was people started thinking differently. Faculty started treating students differently. They started treating staff differently because they came to understand how they fit in this journey along the way, and the way in which the behavior we had as faculty was not contributing to the satisfaction of our students, it was eroding it. And so I think that oftentimes the benefits and the rewards of design thinking, when you step out of the organic growth area, and again, I think one of the beautiful things to talk about design thinking and organic growth is the results are there and real and tangible. You know it works because managers find opportunities to grow their business that they would not have otherwise found. So you don't have to search for metrics to point to the success that design thinking brings to a search for growth. When we step out of the growth area, a lot of times the effects are much harder to quantify because they have to do with the way people identify and frame problems and the broadness with which they think of potential solutions. Right? So we're teaching a much more effective approach to decision making, but it's not showing up in ways that we can easily measure and tick off an award to design thinking as an approach. So I think that's part of the challenge we face.
Teach business students about design and face similar issues with lots of them with stars in their eyes, loving it and wanting to find a job in it. But I wonder if it's actually the wrong question, and I wonder if we should even worry about finding business students jobs in design. There's lots of stuff in MBA programs that we teach that doesn't have a direct link to a job, but we consider it to be a fundamental part of management. And we say you can't be a good manager without doing it. And that may be, if we can convince our faculty colleagues in the ways that you've suggested, that may be a more appropriate way to go than to try and find jobs as business designers.
Yeah. I think, I'm sure you're, in fact, in an ideal world, I think, a world that I hope will happen sometimes, design thinking will just be a basic literacy that we'll expect managers to have. I mean, in many ways, if we look at the path of total quality management, it does seem to me that there are a lot of arguments that can be made that design thinking should follow a similar path. I mean, now part of every manager's job is to understand and think about quality. Not that we don't have a whole set of experts who really know quality and know its techniques and methodologies, and when we need a tough quality problem solved, we call the experts, and yet on a day-to-day basis, as part of making decisions, managers think about quality. It seems to me that design thinking, you're absolutely right, it should fit in that category as well. Part of our basic toolkit.
Hi, I have a comment, and I'm no expert at these topics as I am a young graduate in the field of design. I have attended a few schools, such as the Institute Without Boundaries in Toronto, that elevates design thinking and doing the masters in design. And coming to the real world, a lot of graduates, from my years and past years, are having a lot of difficulty getting into the business world. Having an acronym of Masters of Design puts you really towards, going to go advertising, design consultancy, or design agencies, trying to get into the world of, business conglomerates such as, let's say, KPMG, PwC, the business world. It's like the Berlin Wall, and there's no way there's no access to it. And my question is, a lot of us in the design community that I come from blame the industry. They don't understand design thinking. They do not value what design is. And to be honest, they do not understand what the word design holds. But is there an actual intrinsic problem with the design education and the design thinking and the word, calling it design, to be understood in the real industry? A lot of other jobs are much more clear. I'm an accountant, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer. But what is I'm a designer? When you say a designer, it could mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And this comment, I'm really having difficulty understanding why there's this misperception in the industry. And trying to get a job is is almost impossible in getting into the real industry.
Wouldn't the world be a better place if people actually actively sought that which we knew they really needed? Right? It would be much better. And sadly, even though we know business needs design, and even at some murky level, business itself knows it needs design, we regularly find that the people who come to hire new graduates don't seem to know about any of the other stuff that their companies supposedly want. Right? So we know when we talk to recruiters want leadership ability, and they want people who are creative thinkers, and there's a long list, and then they send their recruiters to Darden, and they basically say, so how are your Excel spreadsheet skills? Right? They're hiring for a set of skills that are completely different, right? And much more fundamental and obvious than the set of skills that they know they need, and at some level in the organization probably even actually think their recruiters are looking for, right? And yet there's that tremendous disconnect, I think, always in the recruiting process, because we gravitate to what is hard versus soft, and we gravitate to what is easy to understand versus what is complex, right? And again, I think if anything gets caught in that space of something that for managers is neither easy to understand nor simple, it is this notion of design and what design brings. I wish I could think of an alternative to accepting the kind of burdensome task of educating people about that, right? And being patient with them as we educate them. But that's the only alternative that I can come up with, which I know is terribly not useful to you at this point in time in your life, right? But what we do find, the basic rule of thumb that I have come to conclude from talking to lots of people succeeding at bringing design thinking into their organizations, is that they find someone with a problem and help them solve it, right? They don't advertise themselves as bringing design or even as offering design. They just locate someone with a problem messy enough that the design approach really makes a difference, and they help them solve it. And that, to me, seems to be the first step on a path to being able to say out loud, right? In some ways, it's like design coming out of the closet. To be able to say out loud, I am a designer, right? As you would like to be able to say walking in the door. Yes, I mean, this is your world.
I think you're absolutely right in your slide that fear is one of the things that keeps this from happening inside the company. But I think that in cases where I see companies turning around and accepting it, it's either fear or pain that is driving them to accept it. It depends on how they respond to fear and pain. There's no reason for them to change if they're healthy. Yeah. No reason for them to adopt this.
Great.
So instill fear and pain. I can't see you clearly. Are you the visitor from Canada? That's the problem. It's not your problem, it's the country's problem. I say that as a Canadian. I'm serious. There aren't many designers in Canada. and it is more present in the United States, in the press, etc. And it's the problem of being in a resource-based economy. We have time for another couple questions.
Yeah, I actually have actually two questions. One has to do with the current way of compensation for managers, directors, VPs, where they receive bonuses on actually achieving results. So I would like to have your opinion about that, because this I've heard many times directors, VPs telling me, "Oh, Mauricio, why would I actually embrace innovation and risk my bonus at the end of the year?" And the second question has to do with the culture of innovation. Now, some organizations are really looking up to design thinking, but once they decide to hire a designer, the designers have a lot of difficulty in mingling within the current environment. So sometimes they just get almost literally expelled from and going out from the organization. Like
a virus, right? I think one of the challenges, and again, my experience has been that it is a special category of designers who can also live in both worlds very well, the business world. If it's a special category of managers who can do that, it's also a special category of designers. And they are rare and unique people who are able to work across the boundaries and the differences in value systems and differences in methodologies and tools to be able to collaborate and put all of this together. So I think that the challenge is clearly on both ends. I think the only thing maybe more difficult than fixing your average organizational culture, system, and process might be to actually tackle compensation systems. I mean, it's clear that our compensation systems in organizations are just crazy. Certainly at the top, the higher you get, it would seem, the more crazy the compensation system is. And in terms of kind of a belief that people are compensated fairly according to the value that they bring to organizations, well, that's not really even capitalism. Right? It doesn't seem to work that way. Compensation is a function of supply and demand and bargaining power, for the most part. And so that world and that reality, I think, is a hard one to grasp. And in my own academic world, for instance, finance professors start at probably twice the salary of a leadership professor. And of course, the leadership professors find this extremely annoying and unfair. But when we point out to them, in fact, that we are teaching capitalism, and that is just an example of capitalism at work, right? It doesn't make it feel any better when your paycheck is half as big, right? And I think that's a huge issue. I think that the tension I always feel in this world is, which battles do you pick, right? There are so many battles out there, and I have such respect for people like Stephen who pick the big battles. Right? Really go after the kind of core and fundamental things that are wrong with this world we live in. In my life, I have been a chooser of the small battles. And I don't know whether it's cowardice or laziness or whatever, but I have found my pleasure in working with one manager. If I have a group of managers, and at the end of the day of a basic discussion of design thinking, their excitement and their enthusiasm and their confidence, their increased confidence that they can go out and make a difference and do things, that to me is the battles I find myself gravitating towards. So I am only enormously grateful that there are others who take on the much bigger and messier and infinitely, I think, more frustrating battles to be fought in our world.
Time for one more.
On the flip side, what can designers learn from MBAs?
Good MBAs are wonderful people, right? Okay. Now, and of course, I get to see the wonderful ones. you know, it's the people. There's a wonderful action orientation. This incredible decisiveness. This willingness to just go out there and get it done. This wonderful naive belief that you can make numbers tell the story about the world, right? Frustrating as that is, it's kind of endearing as well, because you know about 3 months into their first job, they're going to realize how wrong they were, right? But there's its own kind of idealism, right? I really enjoy working with our MBA students. They're kind of just like you are, except probably more conventional in some ways, right? And yet, they too, many of them want to make the world a better place. I mean, you can clearly divide our students into a group of people that are there, and they're there to be investment bankers and to get the Goldman job and to make as much money as possible, right? I mean, I like to think that they're there to do it ethically and appropriately and legally, at least. But that's kind of the extent of their ambitions, right? We have lots of people who are there because they want to make the world a better place. And they believe that they can make the world a better place by being a business person. And in this world that we look at, if we really want to shift, you know, it seems to me a reasonable argument that you can make the world a better place just as powerfully from the position of business as you can from the position of politics or the positions of social work or a lot of other positions, right? And so I think they bring that, and that's why they're so enjoyable to work with, I think. So I think in part of it is, you know, we're the same collection of assorted people that any other group are, and yet I didn't put in a couple of the really good hoarder comments, but basically there was this notion that we create the stereotype of the business person, and then we just live out the stereotype in our behavior, which does not ever seem like a very designerly thing to me to do. So,
did you notice who won that competition?
I'm not surprised.
Thank you, Jeanne.
Okay, thank you.